Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the latest trends in enterprise tech? Look no further than the Breaking Analysis podcast with Dave Vellante. This data-driven program dives into the most important topics facing the enterprise tech industry today. With a data-first approach that leverages ETR's renowned surveys of IT decision-makers and insight from the CUBE community, Breaking Analysis delivers in-depth research on the most important topics facing technologists and IT buyers. Whether you're a business leader, an IT professional, investor, or just an avid follower of the industry, this podcast is a must-listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast wherever you get your podcast and tune in today to stay ahead of the game in enterprise tech.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is Aaron for Cloud News, and it is the end of September, and cloud news has picked up. This is probably a record for the number of articles in cloud news this week, and also a record for the amount of just really big news. You can definitely tell, at least here in Northern Hemisphere, summer is over, everyone is back, and it is time to start announcing stuff as we head into conference season here in the fall. So with that, I'm actually going to do what I did last week of a little bit of a speed around, mainly because there is so many big news articles this week, it's impossible to get them down to a top three. So with that, here we go. In kind of sort of a little bit of an order that they both came in and certainly importance as well. Cisco buys Splunk for $28 billion. OpenTF or Open Terraform becomes Open Tofu, which, naming aside, hey, they moved over to the Linux Foundation as well. Microsoft had a huge data leak. Microsoft exposed 38 terabytes of user data. A really interesting set of articles here by Sequoia. First of all, there was AI's $200 billion question, and then there was a counterpoint from Andreessen Horowitz, the counterpoint to that $200 billion question, and then Sequoia came out with another article. It said AI's Generative Act 2. Definitely go read all of those. Salesforce acquired AirKit for low-code customer service chatbots. Amazon invests, I think it was $4 billion, if I remember correctly. I'm doing that one off the top of my head, in Anthropic. And if you're not familiar with Anthropic, that's the Claude.ai. GitHub announces beta for now available for Copilot. OpenAI had a bunch of announcements. OpenAI adds multimodal, basically voice and image input output. OpenAI also unveils DALL-E 3 as part of that. And then really interesting opinion piece about Sam Altman. If you're not familiar with Sam runs OpenAI. Is Sam Altman the Oppenheimer of our age? Spotify announced they're going to be using AI to train podcaster voices for translation in their voices into other languages. And then to wrap it out, two interesting blogs I found this week that were very informative to me. Augmenting LLMs, fine-tuning versus RAG or retrieval augmented generation. And a nice kind of story of platform engineering to round us out for the week. As I mentioned, a lot going on. So definitely go check out all of those links. But with that, I'm going to close out cloud news. And actually, we have a little bit of a different episode after the break this week. It's just Brian and I, and it's an idea we've been kicking around in our heads for a little while of, will a new cloud emerge? Have things changed enough with AI and other technologies going on? Is there potential for another hyperscaler? We're going to talk about that right after the break.
Today's show is sponsored by Panoptica. Panoptica simplifies container deployment, monitoring, and security, protecting the entire application stack from build to runtime. Scalable across clusters and multi-cloud environments, Panoptica secures containers, serverless APIs, and Kubernetes with a unified view, reducing operational complexity and promoting collaboration by integrating with commonly used developer, SRE, and SecOps tools. Panoptica ensures compliance with regulatory mandates and CIS benchmarks for best practice conformity. Privacy teams can monitor API traffic and identify sensitive data, while identifying open source components vulnerable to attacks that require patching. Proactively addressing security issues with Panoptica allows businesses to focus on mitigating critical risks and protecting their interest, Learn more about Panoptica today at panoptica.app. That's panoptica.app. And we're back. And Aaron, today's show is going to be just a little bit different. Good to be with you, man. How you been?
Not too bad. Not too bad. How about yourself?
I'm good. What in the world were you doing so late at night running? What was that weird thing you were into?
Well, and it's actually going to come up because one of the main sources for our show was a 3-hour podcast I listened to last night, which I'm going to bring lots of data into this. But to answer your question, I am about a month out now from the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C. I ran it 5 years ago. It was the only time I ever ran a marathon. And it's been long enough now. I forgot how much that sucked and how painful that was. And I signed up again. So in another 4 weeks, I'll be up in D.C. Running the Marine Corps Marathon.
All right.
And so I had to run 20 miles as my long run yesterday. And I was in Greenville, North Carolina, visiting my daughter at college all weekend and, drinking alcohol and doing all of those things, and got back Sunday afternoon and then went and ran 20 miles. And it took me till 10:45 at night.
All right. Well, that's a thing people do. Well, congratulations on that. Good luck on that. Yeah. So today's show is going to be a little bit different in that there is not a guest. So this is a Wednesday show. Usually we have a guest. Usually we do an interview. Unfortunately, we had a very last minute scratch. Guest came down with something and had to cancel. And so we said, hey, you and I have not done a show in a while, just the two of us. We used to do them all the time. Now we do them mostly at the end of the year. But I thought, there's a lot floating around, and I wanted to throw out an idea to you to discuss. So do you remember back in the day? So this would be probably back towards the beginning, maybe the beginning, the first few years when we recorded the show.
Probably like 2014, if I had to guess a year.
Yeah. So there was a guy on the internet. I don't know if we've ever met him in person. We might have met him once or twice in person. A gentleman named Simon Wardley, who became very, very well known. Simon was English chap who, had some leadership positions in various places. At one point had worked for, I believe, Canonical, but became a very well-known, people know him for Wardley's Maps. So he's a strategist. He's somebody, big thinker kind of guy. And he used to say this thing that used to kind of drive us crazy all the time. So this was when AWS was probably less than $1 billion in revenue, right? They were still in the other category on the Amazon balance sheet. And he used to say this thing all the time, and he would go, it's really a shame that like HP or IBM or VMware or, one of the sort of established data center companies, large companies, hadn't just decided to build the utility cloud that AWS had done because it was just their destiny to do. Even though it was a completely different business model, it would have been a completely different go-to-market model. He used to go on these rants about how, those guys all dropped the ball and just let Amazon, take the market, right? Amazon just saw it differently and took the market. And do you recall back when we used to have those conversations?
Oh yeah. And it would be the whole, take any of the big ones we just mentioned, right? Like these days we'll put them in the hardware vendor bucket. Mm-hmm. And it was early enough. The barrier to entry was still low enough that you could go capture market and then build from there. And then the story evolved, as AWS got bigger, and then Azure started to come in and GCP started to come in, and we started to, the market started to settle out into the hyperscalers. And it was, well, now you need $1 billion to get started. And then it was like, then you need $10 billion. And it, like the number kept, and now it just got, it's like, hey guys, you're never catching up now.
Right.
And so this, the talk track went from, you could have captured the market, to, hey, you can still capture the market, to, hey, you're a little behind, to, yeah, you lost.
Right. Well, and the other thing that was really interesting to me was just this assumption that any large entity, right? It could have been one of the hardware companies in IT. It could be, looking at Ford Motor or Toyota competing against Tesla. It could be, any number of entities in any, whatever the field might be. And to just say, well, you should look out into the future. You should divert a huge amount of capital to something that, is a completely different business for you, completely different, like you don't get to reuse basically anything that you do today, right? Because, in essence, the other part of it was he was saying, well, the technologies that they sell in the enterprise, none of those are relevant in the cloud anyways. And we always just sort of looked at that and we went, God, it's as if you've never sat in a large company before, because that would never happen. Like it's never happened. It probably will never happen because those companies are, they're public companies. So they live on a quarterly clock, every quarter they live by the clock. They're not going to just get to sort of, put money out there into something that has no sort of adjacencies to what they do. And I got to thinking about it, as I was thinking about the Sunday show, I was doing that long-winded rant about, kind of the new AI hardware tax that all the VCs are sort of frustrated about and all that kind of stuff. And I got to wondering, do you think there's a possibility, and this might be sort of far-fetched and crazy, do you think there's a possibility that somebody like NVIDIA is sitting around going, if AI is going to be as transformative as everybody likes to say, shouldn't we take a bigger stake in controlling this, right? Should instead of just being sort of an arms supplier to the big three hyperscalers, should there be somewhere a blueprint, a boardroom meeting, a 6-page document, a PowerPoint from somebody like NVIDIA saying, maybe we should become the NVIDIA of NVIDIA clouds, in essence, right? Like, should we just sell to these folks, or since we control our own supply chain as it is today, we have a software stack that runs on top of our GPUs that hopefully we're experts in. Should they be looking at saying, let's leapfrog where they are today and build the future? So that is my question for the day for you.
Yes. And man, there's so many different things to talk about here. But first of all, let me bring in my big data source. So go find the latest acquired podcast. I think it's from September 9th or thereabouts. And it is a 3-hour podcast. So by the way, it took me about 4.5 hours to run. So it still didn't take my entire run, but a 3-hour podcast on nothing but pretty much this subject, the history of NVIDIA, how they got where they are now, where they potentially could go in the future, and where should they go, business-wise, based off of supply chain things and all these things you're talking about. So I'm going to bring all of that in pieces, but I think it's also important to, before we think about that, actually ask an even bigger question. And what I mean by that is AWS or any of the big hyperscalers way back when, it was taking the existing hardware architecture and putting it in the cloud, right? Like it was someone else's data center at that point.
Right.
What we're seeing with generative AI and GPUs and everything that's going on, well, the architecture, the hardware architecture is fundamentally different, right? Like it is GPUs at its core, but what are GPUs? GPUs are lots and lots of memory, lots and lots of parallel processing, and then their big secret sauce, and that's really kind of under the covers that no one really talks about, is technology NVIDIA calls NVLink, which is Mellanox InfiniBand relabeled because they bought them under the covers. Yep. So super high speed interconnects, lots and lots of memory, super parallel processing. That does not, they call it the Van Neumann architecture, which is your standard CPU memory, all these other things, how computers have been built for however long. And so the short answer is, like, where I'm going to go with all of this, I'm going to take the opinion of, yes, there is going to be a new kind of data center. There is going to be a new kind of architecture. I hesitate to call it NVIDIA's architecture, like they've already won, But they have been under the covers and behind the scenes working on this architecture, this high performance parallel processing architecture for 10 plus years, actually.
Right.
It's just no one's ever really talked about it because it was like GPUs and gaming.
Right.
They've been working towards an end game under the covers that for a long time.
Right.
And so you have to kind of first start off is, are we going to have a new kind of data center? Not just the existing data center with a whole bunch of GPUs in them. You know, NVIDIA has something called DGX Cloud, which is basically racks of custom NVIDIA gear. They have the DGX portfolio. Then they have DGX Cloud, which is they're starting to operate data centers, you know, like BIA Cloud. If you want to go by DGX, you can go to DGX Cloud. It's going to be super interesting because they have something decently unique in the market. They've got all the buzz. Yes, there's going to be a trough of disillusionment. Yes, I know. But I mean, there's a lot of people throwing a lot of money at this stuff right now. And at least today, NVIDIA has the market cornered. Now, AMD has some things going on. Intel has some things going on. Maybe, you know, things will be rewritten for different architectures. Yes. But at the end of the day, you know, is parallel processing and high-speed memory interconnects and all of these other things the way data centers will be built? Right. So that's kind of where I'm going with all of this.
Right. Well, and it brings up, I mean, yeah, I can see where this discussion quickly turned into 3 hours on the Acquired podcast. Well, because you can go down a bunch of different paths, right? You could sit with folks and talk about, you know, data center architecture, or, you know, cloud data center architecture, whatever you want to call it, for hours, right? Like, what does it mean in terms of, you know, power and cooling and rack sizes, and, you know, do you have to build a nuclear reactor next to where you're doing, you know,
yes.
you can go through the whole thing of like, is there anything reusable out of like an existing data center of, you know, if we fast forward 5 years to what a, you know, GPU or an AI data center would look like, right? Like there's probably a pretty long, interesting conversation that goes on there where you're kind of asking yourself, yes, technical stuff, but also, you know, fast forward, you know, will sort of hybrid data centers survive? Like, will they have a chance to be capable and efficient, or, you know, will the density and all those things sort of go, you know, kind of destroy them and so forth?
Yeah. Let me just add this real quick.
Sort of thing we went through with this last, you know, hybrid cloud sort of thing over the last 10 plus years, where people were like, well, maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah. And I was going to add this too. Like you kind of threw in the comment about the nuclear reactors. I will, yeah, that isn't made up. Like, go check the show notes. Yep. There's a thing that came out, I think it was today, but recently Microsoft is looking into mini reactors to power its data centers. Right. And so it's what's going to happen in the future. I mean, you reach a certain point. I mean, again, there's so many different facets to talking about data centers and clouds. There's so many facets to power and cooling. There's so many facets to placements of data centers in the world, you know, geography, just where to put them.
Right.
Either because they consume so many resources, or, you know, it might be economically beneficial to put them in other places. And they're not getting any smaller.
No. So the reason I think it's sort of interesting, I think would be an interesting sort of discussion to have. Maybe we'll have it at some point. So which becomes more powerful? Because we've talked for the last almost a decade, and we sort of talked about the data center infrastructure that like Amazon has is such a moat. Right. It's so well done. It does things so well. But is that a greater moat? Is that a greater advantage than sort of the software that Amazon has inside of those data centers running it? You know, essentially, you know, creating an API for this super complex set of systems, right? And I think it raises a question of sort of similar type of question, like which will be more valuable going forward, the model and the data, essentially the software and the models, or the moat of sort of the infrastructure and the data centers themselves, right? Because I feel like if I look at like Microsoft, and today AWS just signed a deal with Anthropic, about $4 billion sort of investment. They're essentially betting that the investments they've made on data centers over the last 10 plus years are suitable moats. They're going to try and differentiate or at least have ownership of models. But, as we've seen in other sort of forms of society, you look at, like, if you've ever visited Asia, they basically said, we got started late. We're going to skip sort of the wired telephone model, and we're going to move right to mobile. And the society sort of moved forward in a certain direction versus sort of societies that were based on sort of wired telephones, if you will. So we've seen these things where somebody comes along and says, I'm not going to replicate the old technology. I'm going to try and jump forward to this new one and sort of skip the old legacy stuff. And so I think it brings up an interesting model, like which thing becomes more valuable. And I ask that in the context of, like, could that be something that somebody like NVIDIA could leverage as a jump ahead type of thing?
Well, so first of all, I on the models and the data. So I've been for the day job talking to a bunch of customers here recently. Here's the single biggest problem most folks are having. So first of all, I think a lot of people are setting on this concept of the foundational models, right? Because the models are so big and they're so expensive to train. A lot of people aren't going to be building models. They're going to take an off-the-shelf model, whether they go out to OpenAI, or whether they do a Meta or a Falcon or some of these other models that are out there. So the model doesn't become secret sauce. The training of it, whether it's training it down, doing what they're doing, that's going to be the software secret sauce. But here's the thing. It's not necessarily easy today. Like, it is still really hard. There is a lot of inefficiencies to take a model off the shelf, then train it, then get it inferencing in production. That workflow is not solved at all. And so the problem with it is I see inefficiencies everywhere. Like, we still haven't optimized to any of them. And so for me, it's like, well, what do you optimize for? And what's the opportunity cost of optimization? Do you optimize at the data center level? Do you optimize at the model level, right? Like, it's a stack. It's a developing stack, just like anything else. There's going to be new stacks going forward. New stacks become new tools become new workflows. And eventually it's going to boil down to, some kind of developer experience at the end of the day to get things into production as quick as possible.
Right. Yeah. And it makes me wonder, if you're one of these, you're one of these companies. So let's say you're Hugging Face or you're Anthropic or Stability or, any of these gigantic models who obviously, need access to people that have, these sort of turbo engines, if you will, to let them continue to ingest data and run their models, build their models, train their models, and so forth. Are you surprised yet that we haven't seen them? I guess it's not surprising that they are, partnering with today's, biggest sort of hyperscaler clouds. Do you think they look back on this in a few years and go, maybe we should have taken a chance and gone, with this more sort of vertical stack type of thing? Or
yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, because you look at the if you ever really dig into the OpenAI like journey story, if you will, right? Like, they started out almost as if like a think tank and a nonprofit foundation,
right,
kind of thing, right? And it was only when Elon Musk kind of pulled his money and threw a tantrum and went home that they were like, oh shit, we're out of money and we got to train more models and we got to keep doing stuff. And that's when Microsoft kind of scooped in. And don't get me wrong, they took, it's a win-win situation for everyone. But that's where they went from the OpenAI, because everyone kind of jokes, it's like OpenAI is the name of the company. That is the most closed company. There's nothing open about their models. Right. That's why. And so like, yeah, they kind of got in bed early with that, with Azure. Now, I don't know anything about this one, but the Anthropic one feels to me like AWS got behind in the arms race and went, who's also out there that's still good, that's still on the market that I can go invest in? Because at the end of the day, like I will admit, if I go use one of them right now, like my preference is I'm actually using the Bing one with the Chat GPT-4 turned on,
right?
Because I don't want to pay OpenAI $20 a month or whatever the hell it is.
Well, it feels a little bit like it feels a little bit like, and this is probably going to be a bad analogy, but AWS, they originally built a bunch of really good, super solid, unbelievable, kind of foundational services, right? Like EC2 and S3, RDS, a couple of the other ones are just unbelievable. I mean, like you think of them and you go like, oh yeah, it's just compute and object storage and whatever, but you're like, oh yeah, but the characteristics of it and how easy it is to use and scale are unbelievable. And then they kind of got in this race of, we want to be the everything company, just like we're the everything store. And they started adding all sorts of stuff. And in a lot of cases, the argument is like, well, it's fine. Like they have a instance of MongoDB, but it's not better than MongoDB Atlas. Or they have an instance of Elasticsearch, but it's not better than, the one that's run by the company. But they were able to get away with it because they were like, well, but I have everything for you. And as long as you sign an enterprise contract, you'll just kind of have access to everything. Yeah. And most people don't really know the difference. I think, we've argued for a long time. It's weird that they don't make these sort of big acquisitions because they have tons of resources. It sort of signals that no models, like the Bedrock thing they announced a few weeks ago, where it was like, oh, we're just going to have all the models and we'll just kind of have everything, is people are quickly realizing like, no. You gotta have something you own, and the thing that you have has got to be like the best. Like people are, this is essentially saying like, we think this is going to be a winner take all kind of market, as opposed to like, you want 7 different choices, which is, it's an interesting, it's a different strategy, right? It's a different approach.
Well, and also too, AWS got behind from the very, very start, because again, going back to origins of OpenAI, the company, what really happened was I don't remember the exact years, but 10 years ago or so, a lot of the super AI people in the world, the researchers, the super cutting edge folks, basically all got bought up by Meta and Google.
Right.
And they're just, and so like they, in the arms race actually started years and years and years ago. And Google and Meta, that's how they got to where they are today, is because they had those original folks. Now, a lot of the Google, AI brain, they kind of had a falling out, and there's all kinds of stuff going on there. And, OpenAI chief scientist actually came from, I think, Google Brain. But anyway, the problem with it is they didn't invest early. Again, if you kind of go back to the Simon Wardley model of everything, they didn't do the big bet. They were kind of more about generalized services. Because to go build a AI team and then go train these models, it has a lot of money. And so they decided not to build it, but now they're doing the investment, which is also, as you mentioned, kind of a little bit unlike them. Right. So that just kind of, to me, doubly shows.
Well, it's a little bit of the sort of reverse of the Wardley thing, where Wardley's like, well, you should have just been the one who built this thing. Gosh, you were a big company. Look at your position. Why didn't you just be the leader at it? Because you're the leader in the previous sort of generation of it. And it's like, oh yeah, it doesn't just work that way easily. And then once you do get behind in it, the way that you get out of it is like, it's easier to write checks than it is to build internally. Yes. Because when you write a check, you can sort of strictly drive it out of the CFO's office, and you can do it as a, is this a big enough market? Do we have to be in this space? Whereas if you build it internally, then you're telling every other group that thing that they're doing today isn't as important as this other thing, even though, sort of the value of $1 today might be more valuable than the value of $1 in the future kind of thing. So yeah, interesting. Just playing out the scenario a little bit, and we won't go too long on this. We won't go 3 hours, I promise. We will go a few more minutes. If 6 months from now, a year from now, there was some announcement that was like, hey, at NVIDIA World or whatever it's called, it's like, hey, here's the first 6 locations of, sort of NVIDIA's AI data centers, AI cloud or whatever. Who do you think potentially gets on board with that sort of from a partnership perspective, beyond the 3 cloud providers? Because obviously they get into the weird position of like, we're dependent on you as a supplier, but we're now also a competitor to you.
So here's the thing. Before we even go there, I will answer the question, but before we even go there, I don't see a scenario in which NVIDIA goes super big building out their own dedicated, new architecture public cloud. And here's why. At the end of the day, they're all about taking an idea and maximizing it for every single thing they can. Sure. Well, they already have supply chain locked up. They have like the only fab company in the world already locked up, bought all the capacity. Like, at the end of the day, they've optimized for the right things super early in the supply chain. So, and we've learned, like, in the old days, like when VMware tried to build out a cloud for a while there, right? Like, yeah, you can put a bunch of racks in a data center, but all of the software you have to build for operations and all of those services and all of those things, AWS and all these others got so good at, like, that's going to be hard.
Right. Right. Well, look, and I totally, I totally admit that, like, this would be a really big swing that, would be not at all easy. But at the same time, it's like,
but if somebody's printing money right now, it's them.
Well, and it's, I guess you're really kind of looking at, the most successful businesses over time, always become vertically integrated. Right. Apple, Google, right. Like they become vertically integrated. They start to, but at some point they start with something else. This is one of those ones where it's like, you would be essentially betting, hey, I'm going to skip the current generation of stuff. I'm not really going to kind of compete with like CPU based, x86 architecture stuff. That's not my world. I'm going forward, and I'm just betting that the moat that I have around my stuff is, in essence, they're betting not unlike what happened when cloud came out before, which was like, AWS basically made a bet that they were like, we think our centralized quote unquote IT organization is better than all of your IT organizations.
Yes.
Right. And we're telling you should just, if you're trying to change your business with technology, you should leapfrog trying to train your organizations or do the DevOps or any of that stuff and just come to us.
Yep.
And so, if you're NVIDIA, like I could see where you're sitting there. Now, the hard part is like NVIDIA doesn't have, as we've mentioned multiple times, they don't have some other cash cow business like Microsoft did with Office or AWS or Amazon had with retail or something that could like jumpstart the funding for this other thing. But that doesn't mean that like the funding couldn't come from sovereign wealth fund or a national government or something else that says, oh yeah, we think having this other thing for competitive reasons might be really valuable.
Oh, absolutely. And they are, to your point, they've been slowly behind the scenes a little bit, because everyone talks about the cards, but at the end of the day, they've been vertically integrating for a long time, right? Like they've got the CUDA environment for developers. They've got NVIDIA AI Enterprise for, AI software running stacks on top of cloud native. Like they've been putting, there's software tools for developers. There's lots of tools in the toolkit already. And they've laid out a pretty compelling vision. It's taken them, 10 plus years, maybe 15 years even to get there. But yeah, is the end game. I don't know Jensen's end game. Is the end game exactly that of the next generation of cloud?
Right. Yeah. No, it's it's obviously it's an unanswerable question. We can't necessarily predict the near term future. I just thought it would be sort of an interesting discussion to have, just given some of the things that are happening, some of the behaviors we're seeing from some of the incumbents, and just sort of I spent the weekend doing that show where I sort of looked at some stuff and said like, feels like history is sort of repeating itself, and I'm wondering if I sort of began with this premise of like, the AWSs of the world sort of leapfrogged things. The rest of the world said, no, it'll be okay to be sort of a hybrid of this stuff. And, we sort of saw how, they've both been relatively successful, but maybe not successful at the same pace as the other one, right? But like anything, you're going to build a business model, and then that business model may or may not be viable in, say, 10 years or 10, 12 years or something like that. So, but I don't know.
Something to think about.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
To think about. Well, cool, man. Well, listen, and again, to everybody, we did pull this show together a little bit on short notice. We didn't mean to shortchange you. Aaron probably could have talked about this for another, hour or so. He's got it embedded in his brain now, but, thank you for letting us sort of talk through something that maybe is less structured than we normally do on a Wednesday show. Hopefully that's okay. We're going to get back to our normal interviews for next Wednesday. We've got some stuff lined up, fingers crossed and so forth, that things don't happen. But appreciate everybody being flexible. Aaron, thanks for jumping on short notice, pulling you out of the bullpen, if you will.
Yeah, and I would add too. I mean, we would love to hear your feedback on this one. Especially, I mean, we get lots of feedback, but I feel like we get more feedback on it when it's just you and I. Whether it's people saying yes, that was good, or man, you guys missed this or missed that.
Yeah.
Right. So hey, if we're not thinking about this right, let us know, because I mean, this is a little bit off the top of the head, but it's things I've been kicking around in my head for a while now. I just haven't had to articulate them until now.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Aaron, thanks for being a guest today, I guess. Thanks for being a co-host and a guest, and lending your expertise, your newly found expertise. So with that, folks, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, as always, for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for going on Apple and Spotify and Google and all the places that you give us feedback and reviews. 5-star reviews are always appreciated. With that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.